Welcome to Signal's Continuous Identity Sessions, where we connect the brightest minds in identity with the strategies and real-world approaches that make IAM work better. I'm your non-AI host and fellow generally curious nerd, Dustin Avol. I did get a haircut. Thank you for noticing. In each session, we sit down with the people building and managing identity at enterprise scale, the ones who figured out how to eliminate bottlenecks, reduce manual work, and implement automation that actually improves security without slowing down the business. These people are really doing cool and interesting stuff. And today, we're honored to focus on how identity teams can secure AI agents without breaking that innovation. So if you've ever felt caught between enabling your organization's AI adoption and actually securing those AI workloads with real identity controls, you know this tension all too well. AI agents move at machine speed, make autonomous decisions, and need dynamic access to resources. Traditional IAM just wasn't built for that. So today we're joined by Scott Kriz, CEO and co-founder at Signal, and Atul Tulshibagwale, Signal's CTO, and the esteemed inventor of CAPE, which is Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol, now Profile, and the co-chair of the OpenID AI Identity Management Community Group, co-chair of Shared Signals Working Group, and corporate board member of OpenID Foundation. Atul, that's a mouthful. Scott brings years of experience helping enterprises solve complex identity challenges after having done so directly within Google and Alphabet. And Atul has been pioneering identity standards in many capacities. At Signal, they've been working directly with organizations in the enterprise, navigating all these problems. How do they secure AI agents without becoming bottlenecks? For our audience, we'd love to hear questions and thoughts. Please drop them in the comments or reach out to us directly, and we look forward to responding to every single one. But let's get to it. I'll take a break speaking. Scott and Atul, thanks for joining us. How are you guys doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Dustin.
Before we dive in here, let's get a little bit more about your backgrounds. Scott, you've spent years helping enterprises tackle these challenges in identity. How have you seen AI become a component of that?
It's interesting. I think AI is definitely a unique, a new technology, relatively new. It's not really new anymore, but AI is actually, from a lot of perspectives, no difference than a person or multiple people that just can perform with more persistence and in a different manner at scale. So I don't know that they're altogether unique from a security perspective, but there's definitely an element of exposing existing vulnerabilities in ways that can be a lot more problematic with that level of persistence and scale.
I know we'll get deeper into that, but switching over to Atul, you literally invented CAPE, and we're fond of the continuous nature, obviously, here at the Continuous Identity Sessions. We mentioned a couple of those standards that you've helped to shape with the OpenID Foundation, but tell us a little more about your qualifications on the AI frontier. How have you been staying in front of, informed, just sort of a part of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it rings sort of the, it makes me remember how I got into computers in the first place, right? I was so curious about, I mean, just as a kid, I was so curious about how, how can a machine understand what is 2 + 2? Like, how can a calculator, like, which was popular at that time, understand what is, what is the addition of 2 numbers, right? How's that even possible? So that started me on a journey that ended up as, me being a software engineer. And similarly, I've had an enormous amount of curiosity on, like, how can a machine actually predict, what is the next word I'm about to type? Or, how can a machine actually understand the voice or generate a voice and, all of these things. So I've been tracking AI as a novice, really, for a long time. And I'm so glad that, now I actually am working on it as a part of my job. And I'm both, excited, but also at the same time, as I think about the security implications and the identity side of it, and, it gives me pause. There are definitely some challenges that we need to work through right now. And so, I'm glad I'm able to work on that.
Now, Scott mentioned it, Atul, but I'll go back to you. What's actually different here? I mean, we've been securing applications and users, as you said, for decades. So what makes an AI agent and its access patterns just fundamentally different from both a traditional user or even a service account access.
Right. I think you nailed it, right? Like I'm using a browser to access, the web. It's not actually me accessing the web. So it's like I'm having an agent, which is my browser, accessing the web. So why isn't using an AI agent different? And the other side of it is, well, we've always have APIs, that can be used to talk to servers. Why are autonomous agents any different than APIs, right? I think there are some interesting differences. First of all, I think there is the non-determinism. You don't know how an AI agent is actually going to work. Like when you request a particular website, until you actually click on a link, it's not actually going to go there, right? Whereas an AI agent has those sort of unpredictable behaviors where it can decide what to do next and actually execute those actions, right? And similarly, on the API side, you might be, testing your APIs for very predictable behaviors and giving them permissions because you know that the part that is calling the API is going to behave in a certain way and they have some, certain controls around it. Whereas when you're talking about an autonomous agent, it's actually just a user in your machine. It's just like another human. It's just having a different kind of behavior. So it's like neither the API, it's not like a normal human agent, right? So all of these things are very different in AI compared to a normal, API or browser kind of use case.
Scott, understanding sort of that fundamental difference, when you're working with enterprise organizations at some of the highest levels, do you see the temptation just to treat AI agents like service accounts and call it a day? And why does that not work, or does it work? And sometimes that's the fine solution.
Yeah, the largest organizations actually they wrestle with service accounts completely separately. So I think that's a still problem in security and a known one, and it has been largely not solved. So AI is quite a bit different than having a service account. Although at its fundamental core, it looks maybe similar. I think what we're finding is that the adoption of AI is really being pushed by companies wanting to achieve faster velocity and more results with less humans involved. And so there's a real business need versus, the whole concept of managing service accounts is in order for operations to just work. So there are two different motivations. On the AI side, wanting to let your company move faster, and I think there's a lot of things in industry right now where organizations are thinking if they can't leverage AI appropriately to get that velocity and scale with less humans, that they're going to be left behind and they're going to be the next competitor will replace them. And so there's this really big motivation to deploy AI solutions within the company. And there's always this push and pull between security and velocity. And so as it stands today, AI is extremely helpful to getting a lot of jobs done. And you read a lot about coding specifically, but in any function, marketing, sales. And I think one of the unique aspects is, as Atul was mentioning, its ability to interact with things that you didn't necessarily ask it to interact with. And so that requires you to have systems that are opened up a little bit more, and the level of data access may be a little bit, if you want to achieve real velocity, is generally open to AI. You can imagine that presents all kinds of security problems. So I think your question about how organizations are thinking about this, it's very different than service accounts. And I think there's two general ways that large Fortune 500 companies specifically are thinking about it. One is we're not going to let people use AI unless it's very isolated and doesn't have access to data sources, because we just don't know what to do yet. And we're going to wait to see how things mature. And a lot of the standards that we work on are still relatively new. And so they're kind of in that, let's sit back and wait, but be ready to figure out the best mode forward. The other type of organization, which is a very different culture, is saying, well, we just have to run fast. And it's a little bit more of the willingness to be able to break things in order to get to your goals. Surprisingly, that does exist in even the largest scaled companies, but it's definitely not the predominant stance. I think that represents immediate achievement when it comes to velocity, with potentially catastrophic and maybe even company-ending events if you don't change the security posture. So that's the way I think that these organizations are thinking about agents within the company. Now, that's when you get them to scale. I think there's a somewhat in between where organizations are willing to say you can interact with an agent that isn't something we've built, so an OpenAI or Claude or something like that, and not connect those tools into data systems. So there's still isolated benefit, but not some of the risks. So those are the two extremes, and then kind of the middle, which is also a little bit of a waiting till they figure out how to do AI at scale across all of the sources of the company.
It's interesting how you talk about the motivation and the culture at this level, like in terms of what's sort of motivating this adoption and these differences. We talked a little bit with Felix Gatkins on an earlier episode about non-human identities and machine identities, and it's interesting just me how how the culture and the motivation gets interwoven into these evaluations and not just purely a technology decision. Atul, let's go back to you. You've written a little bit about how we're seeing this identity crisis within AI, and maybe we should have seen it coming. I would love if you could take us deeper through what that means and what you meant by that. I know you started to talk about some of the unique challenges that AI agents introduce to identity and security teams that they maybe haven't been prepared for.
Yeah, I think, I think of it as like, a sort of a paradigm shift, right? Because we've been thinking in terms of specifically roles, permissions, what can this particular user do at, this time with this application and stuff like that, based on very predictable patterns of usage, right? So just like we were, thinking in terms of like SQL and joins and tables and normalization and schemas and all that. And when NoSQL came about, it was a completely different way of thinking about databases, right? I think there is a shift like that is going on in terms of the identity and security of AI, right? So you cannot leverage the old concepts in the new world because of the way in which AI behaves is very different, right? And so what you need to focus on more is, definitely the more continuous security or continuous identity that, we are interested in working on, right? So let's think about AI in sort of, three different use cases or maybe four different use cases, right? One is where there is a user who's interacting with a chat bot or some agent, and then they are getting their job done, right? So they're available to answer any questions about permissions and stuff like that. Or you may have some enterprise policy that can be invoked at any time to provide the right kind of permissions, right? The other one is where you have a user who has initiated a task but is not available anymore, right? So they may have gone away, but they have initiated the task, and the task sort of takes a day or two to complete, and then they're able to do it, right? The third one is where you're just employing automated agents, right? There is no human in the loop. And these are just agents that are assigning themselves work, they're getting their job done, and that's how it works. And then the fourth one is where any of these three use cases end up in a situation where they have to make a chain of calls through your network, right? How do you now understand the identity and security of all of this in all of these three cases, right? So I think these are the ways in which I think about identity, and I think that this is why we need to have a completely different way of thinking for AI and identity.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, when you couple what you were saying about the motivation and the different adoption curves with the use cases that Atul has laid out there, and you talk to identity leaders and these Fortune 500 organizations, how do they place the ownership on this? What's their usual reaction? Are they thinking about this as an identity problem, or do you see it landing elsewhere in the organizations?
Yeah, it tends to fall in the, I'd say the emerging field of identity security, which there used to be a group that was identity folks and a group that was security folks, and those are now becoming new departments of identity security. So generally, that's where we're seeing that this lands. But I think it's not really where it lands, because it's actually, these are now board level mandates of either the board of large companies pushing to be highly effective and competitive and utilize AI, or the reverse of board mandate to make sure that things are very secure. And those two things again are at odds, but they are both equally important and valid for companies to succeed as AI becomes deployed.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, as we all know, throughout organizations, when board level mandates get directed, there tends to be some action. Before we get too far down the road, let's sort of step back here and build a better foundation, so we're all on the same page. We've heard about MCP, Model Context Protocol. Atul, you've been working on some of the MCP profiles, how they relate to enterprise AI adoption. Can you help us better understand what is MCP? Why does it matter for identity teams trying to secure these agents?
Sure. Yeah, I think MCP is a really important development because it provides a standard by which a LLM, and in coordination with the client that you're using, like a chatbot or an agent, it can standardize the way in which it has access to data. And to get really good productivity from an LLM or AI agent, you need access to the enterprise data, right? So that without that, you won't be able to do anything that is meaningful within your organization. So standardizing this communication is super important. And that is exactly what MCP provides, right? But it also sort of provides it in a way that is very LLM friendly, right? So it's not just like an API. It's not like, I'm saying, here are my 5 endpoints and this is the documentation, and you call them like this and, provide these parameters. This is how you would describe the API. What the MCP server does is it says, here are my capabilities. Here is what I can offer you. You figure out what questions you're going to ask me and what, answers you're going to do, right? So what answers I'm going to be able to send you. So it's a very different way of presenting your services within your organization, right? And so I think because it now makes the LLMs highly sort of integrated with your data, I think that is why MCP becomes very important. And having that standard becomes very important. Of course, there are definite security concerns with all of this. And that's why I think we have our jobs kind of cut out for us, that we need to figure out how to make sure all of this works very securely in the enterprise, right? Aside of the fact that the LLMs themselves might have other security concerns about hallucinations or prompt injection and all that, but just making sure that the identity and security of the plumbing between the client and the server, and making sure that any data that is being accessed on the server side is accessed in the right context, is super important for us to assure.
And as I mentioned in your introduction, you've been active in the standards bodies. Can you just take a quick second and give some background as to why something like a standard is important for interoperability and just like driving an industry forward?
Sure. And I think, there's been some debate about whether MCP is actually a standard or not. So let me also dwell on that a little bit. Standards come in all ways, right? Like, because you take something like the OpenID Foundation, like an OpenID Connect, anyone can join the OpenID Foundation. They can vote on the proposals, and it's a very deliberative, sort of consensus-driven process to come up with a standard. Contrast that with like something like the IBM PC, which everyone will agree is a standard because that's how PCs were made for decades, right? But it's not an open standard, but it's a standard that is sort of proposed by the most sort of dominant player at the time, which was IBM, right? You have a similar situation with MCP. It's not a fully open process. It's governed by Anthropic, and they've very good governance rules around it. But what gives it the importance is because Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google have all agreed that that's a standard that they're going to adopt, right? So it becomes like a de facto standard in the industry, right? And so that is a very important standard here. There are other things happening like AP2, which is the Agent Payments Protocol, or ACP, which is an equivalent of that, and from OpenAI. So I think a lot of standards activity here in this space. I'm sorry if I don't know if I fully answered your question. I think you're asking.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I just, like I said, knowing your background and I participated in standards, I just wanted to extract a little bit more about MCP as it relates to standards and standards in general. So I appreciate that. And Scott, maybe you've seen some of the impact that MCP is having in customer accounts, in enterprises, or just in the industry in general. What have you seen there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go so far to say that MCP as a concept with two of the largest companies in AI, OpenAI and Anthropic, getting behind it, might be the single most exciting thing that's happened in technology in the last 2 years. And let me tell you a little bit why I think that. If you remember the first time you interacted with ChatGPT, you went to it and you like typed something and you're like, I don't know what to do with this thing. What do I do? And you ask it a question, you have it write you a sonnet. You start to do trip planning and all kinds of, and that's really cool. But it's very insulated to your interaction with this model that was trained on data and the things that it's still super important. What MCP really represents is a standard way to now connect that experience with the real world in a way that can take action. As Atul mentioned, it's not just MCP, there's a payments element. But now picture a world where you're not just interacting and doing some fun planning and helping with your job to be more efficient in how you write an email. But imagine you're landing. Imagine that MCP now is the mechanism at which your agent is able to get data on you that you want it to have. And that's an important aspect because MCP definitely needs some security around it to be able to see the different systems that you interact with. Imagine that you have an agent as part of your whatever GPT you want to call it. And it knows what your schedule is. It knows that your flight landed an hour late. It also knows that you're returning back to a place you haven't been for a month. And because it has a history, it knows where your favorite restaurant was there, and it has access to DoorDash. And when you land, you open up your phone, and you can turn your phone back on the airplane. And all of a sudden you get a message that says, hey Dustin, welcome back. You haven't been here for a while. I've taken the liberty of looking at the wait time at your favorite restaurant, this shawarma place you haven't been to for a while. And it looks like, based on your past orders, like you might really want to get a chicken shawarma with a side salad. And it looks like I can order it at the right time, so it'll meet you at home by the time you get there. I've already ordered you an Uber. It's going to be arriving in 5 minutes at gate 6, baggage claim. Let me know if you'd like me to pursue that. So I know that's a consumer example, but it starts to get you thinking that this is a technology that is connecting artificial intelligence. No one can argue the impact of AI, but when you start to actually have meaning in the real world, really fun things happen. I would say in a negative way, potentially, really bad things can happen too. And I think we are at this place in time where if we don't do the security correctly, this will be the difference between that wonderful experience you had and kind of the Terminator situation. And so we have to be really careful. And I think the leaders like Avol, who are focused on the standards and the consistency, this is the critical components, and this is the foundational work that will make this be good for our society, both at work and personally, and not dangerous. And so it's getting a lot of attention for a reason. And I think when we first heard about MCP, and then all of a sudden a few of the largest companies were behind it, at least my LinkedIn, and that's a lot of identity people, obviously, and AI people, everyone was creating an MCP server. We can do this. You can interact with us now. You can interact with us now. And there's been some hiccups in that because there's been data that's been too permissive, which has caused on a corporate side data to be available between competitors because they use the same piece of software. So these are the types of things I think that are top of mind. The fun is to imagine a world where this is done correctly. And I think the motivation is to imagine a world where it's not.
It's a really interesting example that you gave, as you stated, consumer-based. And I'll bite on this sort of intro and ask if you've led this horse to water sort of now make me drink in terms of, so what does that mean for identity and access management? And is it the same in the enterprise as it is in consumer? Could you sort of connect those dots for me to extract that real use case?
Yeah, so think about this example where these agents can create agents. So there's kind of a chain of command here, right? And Atul does a lot with identity chaining as well. And he can talk in detail if he wants to about that, or probably send you some more information because it's a pretty in-depth topic. But yeah, sorry, what was the question again? I lost track. So I was thinking about Atul's transaction tokens project.
Well, I just wanted to really extract that into an enterprise example.
Yeah.
But also as MCP relates more directly to identity. I mean, obviously there's a relationship there that we can extract or imply, but let's be right up front.
I'm with one of the larger software companies, and I'm not going to tell you who it is because you'll know why when I give you the story. And like for anyone who's been in a large enterprise, I know that it was this way at Alphabet. When you're doing headcount planning, it's a turbulent part of the year where you're trying to figure out what you can get done in the next quarter and year and how many people are going to be on your team. And there was a manager and the company had stood up their own agent and LLM to be able to interact, and it connected, in this case, not leveraging MCP because it predated it, but you can see where MCP would come in handy in the future with data sources across the organization. And the manager typed in, "I'm doing headcount planning. Can you let me know next quarter what the new headcount is going to be on my team?" And it came back, I think it was a couple hundred headcount short. And so, well, the next question was, of course, well, why do I have less headcount? And it comes back and the agent says, well, there's going to be a reduction in workforce. And the next question was, who is impacted? And the person's name was on the list. They were going to be laid off effectively. And this is actually the example where the human is interacting with an agent, the agent's going and doing things that it's being asked to do, and it's interacting with services and data sources. But the security around the human and the agent acting on behalf of the human did not go through any type of check on what was the context of the question, what is the role of this person, where are they, what are they trying to ask, which data sources should we be leveraging in order to respond to that person. And so that's an example where things, and it's kind of a funny example, but I think it's meant to illustrate, you can get really into depth of when you interact with this from a engineering perspective or product management, marketing, sales, customer perspective on support, and the how data being in the wrong places with the wrong folks can be problematic. But I think that's an illustration, just a really simple one, of how running fast is impactful, but it might not have the impact that you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example, and grave for sure, which is why I think it's impactful. Atul, one of the things that I heard in that example, especially from Scott, is that AI agents might request or need different permissions at different times based on context, really. Like, who are they acting on behalf of? Should this individual gain access to this data or be able to see the responses, or what data they're working with? And so I'm going to ask you kind of a convoluted question here, but hopefully it comes out as, how do you handle that kind of what I would call dynamic authorization at I think it's machine speed, at the speed at which, and why is that speed important? So the two-part question is really like, how do you handle that, and why does it need to be, so speedy?
Well, I think speed is always going to be there, right? Like regardless of whether you're using AI or not, you want to be able to provide the answers reliably and quickly, because there's a lot of flows, information flows that just can't wait for an authorization decision, right? So I think keeping that aside, I think the interesting thing here is, you now have a situation where it's completely unpredictable how the agent is going to behave, right? What is it going to try and access? Which servers is it going to trust? How deep are the chains, the call chains are going to go in order for a user to fetch the information that they're looking for? So that kind of adds to the unpredictability. Like when you're having an API, let's say you, as a customer service representative, you say, I want the address of this customer. And the customer service, the API will say, well, you're not privileged to have that information, right? It's just going to say no. But now, if you're an AI agent, you're not going to stop there, right? You're going to say, okay, I couldn't get the answer by just asking the question. How can I get that answer, right? So it might ask the question, oh, give me the drop-off locations near so-and-so customer's home, right? And maybe that is information available to that customer service representative. So now you have triangulatable data that that can reveal that information, right? I think clearly this is something that you could do on your own, but this is the unpredictability of AI, that it will think of these ways that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise to get information that you're not supposed to be having, right? And so the question then becomes, like, as this progresses through the whole system, you need to be sure about what data you're revealing at what point to the to the user, and you need to do this completely dynamically and in a continuous sort of way without slowing down the whole process, right? And that's, I think, the challenge we have. There's so many technologies here. Well, there's a good bit of work that is happening around MCP and OAuth and some related standards like cross-app access, or I think it's called enterprise managed access or something, which can give you some of these capabilities. I think there's much work to be done, and it's really exciting to be a part of that development.
Yeah, great. I would agree that there's a lot of work to be done. So Scott, if I'm an IAM leader or identity security, if that's the sort of growing department or role at an enterprise, and teams are starting to leverage those opportunities, jump in, like you said, in a couple of those different use cases, whatever the motivation, maybe some sanctioned, maybe some are sort of shadow AI. Where does a team even start securing this without becoming like that killer of AI innovation and an enabler? Like where do they even start?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is to understand the problem at its core before you think about how to solution. And I would say probably the most eye-opening thing that happened for me personally was when I heard about MCP, and I was wondering, how dangerous is this thing really, and is it really as easy as people talk about to mess things up? So I went to Claude and I asked it to write me an MCP server that can run locally on my Mac, and I pointed it to what we use as a SaaS solution for tracking tickets inside of our company, and it wrote me the MCP server. It didn't work perfectly, but I would consider myself, in that experience, I didn't write any code, but I did look into the code and change one or two things. And within an hour, I had this MCP server running, and I was asking questions like, who's the most productive person in the company? And it was interesting. It gives really good responses. Well, it's hard to say who's the most productive because this person closed the most tickets, but these tickets are the most complex. And so it was really fascinating. And I started to, ask it a whole bunch of these types of questions. I was like, wow, this is really cool, and this is really powerful. And then I asked Claude to tell me what the easiest way to make this accessible to other people in my company was. And it walked me through a very specific process that was correct in how to deploy that MCP server on AWS or GCP. Those were the two that it gave me. I'm not sure why. And when I looked through it with my security hat on, I noticed that what it was actually telling me to do was essentially the result would be opening up that interface for anyone that knew how to get there to ask anything they wanted about the data source that is Signal's way that we run our product development team. And I thought, that is absolutely insane, that it's so easy that someone that doesn't write code can ask Claude to do something within an hour, potentially expose their company data to the world. And so I think that your question about where to start, I think it's to actually do that, to sit down, create an MCP server. You can point it at the API documentation for whatever you're trying to interact with, because I think that's the moment at which you realize that how powerful and how dangerous this is. And then the question is, okay, so what do we do about it? And you can take the stance of, well, first reaction is a policy, not a technical policy, a written down policy in security says no one can use this thing. No one can use MCP no matter what. Because then you're saying, you get fired if you do that. And that's not a bad place to start, but then it's okay, well, now how do we unlock this capability? Because you can already tell how profoundly impactful it would be on productivity. And I think there were a lot of people that reacted to this. And actually, I'm guessing I haven't done this, but if you go and do a search through Google and say like MCP gateways of like, there's probably 24 of them by now. And they're by different companies in security and identity and non-human identity, or just someone that created it for, and it's open sourced. And so the idea there is you're creating a choke point. It's a proxy, right? Everyone's familiar with how these things work. And so you're saying, well, if we can centralize how these things actually, where they go through, and we can start to catalog which servers are being created, who's creating them, and create a registry, it's almost creating the directory for MCP. I think that's a good first step, is to say, it's similar to when I mentioned the service accounts, is you have to have an inventory before you can do anything with it. How can you possibly have security if you don't know? And then the next step is decide, now that we have a central place to inventory, are there ways that we can control the interaction between the MCP server and other services? And there's a few ways to do that. The simplest one is, I think anyone can build a homegrown system probably pretty quickly that would be able to do role-based access control for based on whatever IGA solution they're working with. Which is a good first step, but you quickly get to a place where like, all right, that's not scalable. And what is a role of an agent mean, especially in agents creating agents? And how dynamic is that? And how do we know what the intent is? And so there's many different layers to AI security. And you probably have other guests that are going to talk about the ways that you can poison LLMs with specific data, or how you want to look at how you handle prompting that's obviously has ill intent. But I think at the end of the day, controlling that data layer and trying to understand the context of the request and what that context coming from the user and the agent together are trying to do and letting it happen or not. And so I think it's an evolution. I think you start somewhere and you end up where you are the most comfortable, that that's secure. And what I found is that when companies are pursuing that type of solution, they get to the point where they have kind of this aha moment of not this is how this should be done. The aha moment tends to be, why aren't we doing this for our humans also? And that's a really interesting dynamic to watch, because all of a sudden the focus goes from new thing to fixing the existing thing. And I think the real folks that are most far along in this process are doing those in parallel. So they're not saying we need to solve human first and MCP. They are in a lot of cases saying we don't know what to do with MCP, let's put that on hold and let's handle the human side. But when you think about all of these pieces and aspects of security that apply to AI, there are some that are unique around prompt and intent. But when you really dig deeper, maybe they're not as unique as you think. We just have an implicit trust on human behavior a little bit more than we do something that we can't as implicitly control. That's true.
Yeah. Wow. Atul, as Scott just described, there's clearly a relationship between the AI agent security and a broader continuous identity approach. As we've said, you guys have both stated here in this triple play that we have, traditional or legacy approaches have often relied on role-based access, static role assignments, periodic access reviews. So how do you shift to a model where maybe these decisions happen more in real time by both leveraging context and not overwhelming your identity team with constant updates? How does an organization head in that direction beyond just starting, like Scott said, and doing an inventory, to transition into that more continuous approach across AI and human users?
Yeah, I think you also need to sort of start with, what are the identities involved, right? Because in some use cases, the user identity may be more important, like where a user is interacting directly with the agent. The agent identity itself is not that important in that regard. It's just the user identity that is flowing through. Whereas if you have an autonomous agent, it's the agent identity that becomes important, right? And so you have to now think of access in these ways, right? In terms of like the dynamism and the continuous nature of it, I think that you have to evaluate every agent request in context, right? What is the agent trying to do, and what is the data that it is requesting, and is that data actually relevant to the task that is that the user is trying to achieve, or the trouble ticket that the agent is trying to work on, or something like that, right? So you have to somehow be able to map, the intent to what is actually being requested, right? A great example that I mentioned a few times is, if I need something from the corner store and I give my credit card to my kid and ask them to like go fetch, that item from the store, the kid gets into the car, finds out the car needs gas, and now uses my credit card to fill gas in the car. It's clearly a legitimate use of that card, but it's how do you correlate that to the intent that the user actually wanted to do, right? That is the challenge that we have in AI, and which is why I feel like you have to think very differently in terms of assuring access in AI. And it can be done, but it has to be in a very contextual kind of way. And I can't say I have all the answers, but I think we are coming up with the frameworks that can give us the ability to do this now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I think I hear as getting towards, not only in the intent and sort of what can be allowed or what can be approved, but also post-action, post-decision, I hear a little bit around audit and compliance. So Scott, if access is dynamic, or Atul, if access is dynamic and happening at this machine speed, how do you maintain the audit trail and governance that these enterprises are really looking to maintain?
Yeah, I'll answer real quickly, which is, I think the concept of access reviews and identity governance is changing to look at the core logic that goes behind the decisions of context versus the static view of who has access to what. Because who has access to what is a snapshot at that particular point in time without any additional information of what should have happened or should not have happened. So I think a lot of these legacy vendors are doing a great job now at starting to explore how they handle more dynamic environments. And I think that impacts the audit and compliance piece quite a bit. I've heard a lot of large organizations, specific people say, that's too hard, the auditors won't understand it. And which is fascinating. I think it's an interesting perspective. I don't think it gives auditors a lot of credit. And when you ask someone that's actually done these audits, you realize like that couldn't be further from the truth. The people that are doing the audits, they understand so much more probably than the person in that single role, because they're looking at how different companies in different industries are handling their security and compliance. And so that encompassed view is, I think much more acute than people give them credit for. And they are itching for that next iteration of something that is more secure. And you start to see auditors bringing engineers with them to look through what kind of logic goes into these decisions. And sure, there's still the validation that, based on this, the information we have, this person should not have been able to do this at this time. Is that in fact the case? And they can look at audit logs and determine whether or not that's the case, and make sure that, not just the logic is put in place, but it's actually been implemented in a way that works. But I think it's evolving, and I think actually it's becoming a much more interesting field. I don't know that I've met anybody that says, I look forward to the next time I have to do a user access review. But a lot of that is because they know that they're going to be rubber stamping, and they know that they really can't do better than that. But to give them a better framework and a more logical way to look at the world and say, yes, this seems sensible, it makes it simpler, not more complex. And I think sometimes the assumption is the reverse.
Yeah. Atul, anything to add in the audit compliance of this new world?
Yeah, I mean, just resonating what Scott is saying is, auditors need to assert that, there is a compliance between the stated policy of the organization and what is actually happening in the organization, right? Today, that translates to a very indirect way of establishing that by saying, oh, do you have good processes around putting people in groups or roles and entitlements, and then verifying that indeed those things have been reviewed from periodic, from time to time. That's an indirect way of establishing what you really want. And what, it won't work in this contextual dynamic world, because, those things are changing by the minute or, faster, right? And so what you really want to know is, okay, can you justify every access based on, what the user was supposed to be doing at that point of time, right? Or what does it actually comply with the policy that is stated, right? And I think that is actually easier now with the dynamic access or policy-driven access systems, right? So I think I feel like this is bringing, like Scott was saying, it actually makes us introspect and look at our existing processes rather than invent something new, right? So yeah.
Yeah, great. I mean, this has been great. And as we start to wrap up here with two of Signal's leaders, Atul, I'll ask you first, and then Scott as well. If listeners could take away a single thing from this session, what would you hope that would be?
I think approach with caution, but I think we are getting to a really good world of amazing developments with AI. So exercising caution while doing that is super important.
Yeah, Scott.
I think it's just the world's just gotten so much more interesting and exciting, and I just hope that it really takes rolling up your sleeves and diving in to understand that. And it's fun and it's strategic. So I hope the takeaway here would be just roll up your sleeves, even if it's not a project that has something to do with your current role in your job. Like, just get exposure to what's going on, because I think it's it reminds me very much of when I first started using the internet and building websites and interacting with databases. It was like, wow, this is amazing. And I think it's even more so now than it was then. And so the first step is always just rolling up your sleeves and doing anything, because it will lead you to a place where you're figuring out, and hopefully folks that are listening to this are involved in these communities and can contribute to these protocols that are being established today, because it's fascinating, it's foundational, and it's going to be really amazing where it takes the industry, not even from a security perspective, from a software perspective, from a evolving technology perspective as well.
Good point on the communities. And Atul, I'll put it over to you, since I know that you belong to or lead a handful of these. What are some good resources? I'm sure we'll attach some resources to this recording, but forums or communities where identity teams or leaders that are interested can keep up on all this stuff.
Yeah, I think the OpenID Foundation's AI Identity Management Community Group is a really good place. We are working on three main things. One is the taxonomy, the other one is the use cases, and the third one is the threat models. It's just forming right now, so there's a good opportunity to come in at the ground floor and influence a lot of this work. There's also sort of the MCP community. There's a Discord server, and we can share the link to that later. that you can participate in all discussions about developing the MCP protocol, and you can also review the governance guidelines there to see how you can participate. So I think those are the two that I would highly recommend. There are also like a lot of conferences right now about AI and all that. Just participating in that, or identity conferences that talk about AI. Just participating there can help you build more perspective, get more knowledge about all of this.
Speaking of the conferences, are there events or engagements that listeners could see or hear from both of you at, maybe Identity later in the year or upcoming, where you'll be present?
Yeah, I think we're always updating our list on the website. So SGNL.ai, Signal.ai. It's too many to mention. So we're at a lot of conferences. We move around quite a bit, but as soon as we announce that we'll be somewhere, it shows up, and so it's usually a few months or more ahead of time.
Yeah.
Atul, anywhere you're speaking in the upcoming weeks or months?
Just next, I think the week after next, I'll be speaking at the ODSC West conference, Open Data Science Conference or something. I'll be speaking at an executive roundtable about AI. So yeah.
Tough to keep track. We always end on a question that we like to ask each person on the show. I'll start with you, Scott, in the spirit of continuousness, if that's a word I've tried to use here, or continually evolving. What's something that you continually try, something that you do continuously?
Interesting. I actually, that's a really hard question, Dustin. I think you can, if you dissect your life into every possible thing that you can do, it falls into the continuous. And so being in the business of identity security and knowing that everything is fluid, and we live in a world where like you unlock a door and then you lock the door. Like that is not continuous, but you flowing through life is continuous. So when I think of like how the world should work, it's things like being able to walk up to your car without a key, and you just walk in and you start driving your car, and you never think about the security or implication of it because of the continuous nature of how our world is being built. But at the same time, knowing that if anyone else were to potentially walk up to your car, they wouldn't be able to do that because that's not something they should be doing. So I almost think of like life as continuous. And when I go about my day, I am continuously thinking about the implication of having a world that is secured appropriately. And I think it's been a great evolution. So it's a weird way to answer the question, but it's kind of just, the regular flow through life.
Atul, anything less philosophical or more? I'll take either.
Well, I mean, hard to top what Scott just said, but I think what I guess one of the things I at least aspire to be continuously doing is learning, and sort of having all this sort of fire hose of AI being pointed at me right now is giving me both a lot of joy and some amount of overwhelming sensation of like I can't keep up with all of this. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I know I feel at least 20% smarter after this discussion from continuously learning from you both, which I get to do on almost a daily basis. So thank you both. Looking forward to hearing more on the future of AI from you guys and from Signal. And thanks to everyone who joined us today or is tuning in from the future. Quick reminder, all these continuous identity sessions are recorded and available at signal.ai and our YouTube channel. We're really racking up an on-demand library over here, and you can subscribe at signal.ai to get details to all the upcoming episodes. Also find resource links, articles, and maybe some slides that Scott and Atul mentioned in the follow-up email if you subscribe. But for now, Dustin, Avol thanking Scott, Kriz, and Atul Tulshibagwale. Next time, same channels, next level insights. The next continuous identity session will be coming soon. Until then, keep making identity work better and more continuous. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.